to Spain, which could most efficiently be brought to Spain from the eastern shores. So very early on, there was movement from and across the Isthmus of Panama. In 1855, secondary to gold being identified in South America, gold rush prospectors actually built a railroad along the bed of the Camino Real. This is, as you're going to hear more as we go forward, this area is a hard area to work. It's hot, there are bugs, and there are a lot of diseases that develop secondary to it, and I'll tell you more about that. But when the railroad was built, over 6,000 lives were lost due to just the general environmental aspects of building that railroad. Now, the story with the Panama Canal actually starts with the French. Now, the French were the country, and specifically Ferdinand de Lesseps was the engineer that built the Suez Canal, which connected, as I told you, the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. This canal was privately funded, and it was built between 1881 and 1889. The French believed that they had a great deal of experience with the Suez Canal that would be applicable to the Panama Canal. But what happened actually was there were engineering mistakes, there were disease, there was mountainous terrain rather than that nice sandy sort of presentation that was present in the Suez Canal. There was jungle, and ultimately the French failed. And the private funding produced bankruptcy and a great deal of depression for the engineering team and for those French supporters. Now, with the failure of the French, the United States stepped in. And at that time, and now we're talking about 1901, at that time the president was Teddy Roosevelt. Now, knowing how important the Panama Canal would ultimately be for commerce and markets, the president viewed it as even more important to have a strong navy for the United States. Currently, before the canal, we had two separated navies. We had a navy in the Atlantic and a navy in the Pacific, and it was hard to do the logistics. We basically had two separate navies. It was very difficult to provide procurement. So the government of the United States truly wanted it from a military perspective. The isthmus was actually controlled by Colombia, but there were people within the Panamanian area that wanted to be separated from Colombia. There was a revolution, which was partially supported by the United States, which actually only lasted 3 days, and 12 days later a treaty was signed between the United States and Panama, which was in 1903, which allowed the United States to move forward with the construction of what would be the Panama Canal. The story, though, is although the political issues look like they could be solved very quickly, the engineering and many other obstacles were more complex. First, there was disease. Yellow fever and malaria were in place. In fact, during the French experience, over 20,000 people died from either yellow fever or malaria. The United States brought in a tropical disease expert who was Dr. William Gorgas. Dr. Gorgas had literally wiped out yellow fever in Cuba in 12 months and had determined that it was secondary to mosquito infection. This, for some reason, the French did not accept this argument, and as a result did not take on the suggestions of Dr. Gorgas. But when Dr. Gorgas was under control of the United States, they did amazing things. And they were able to literally wipe out yellow fever in 18 months. And due also to being able to reduce standing water, they were able to reduce the incidence of malaria by 90%, which was in itself a tremendous accomplishment. It was decided that whereas the French had tried to build a sea level canal, which is a canal in which you excavate all the material between two sea level locations, whereas a lock canal is one in which you can have differences in height across the land, as long as you have locks, which will make up the difference as you go from one side to the other. They're both at sea level, but the heights in between can be different with a lock canal, and this means you don't have to remove as much material. John Stevens was the chief engineer, and it was he that convinced President Roosevelt that only a lock canal would succeed in Panama, and it's my belief that he deserves a great deal of credit in making this happen. It turns out that he calculated that if we elevated and kept an elevation of 85 feet, in other words, from sea level up to 85 feet, where you didn't have to dig down an extra 85 feet, you could make this work. He developed a lock system which included 12 locks. This means 6 locks going from east to west and 6 locks coming back from west to east. Now these are double locks, so that means you really only had 3 going in one direction and 3 double locks going in one direction and 3 double locks coming back in the other direction. He designed 3 massive concrete walls which were paired. Each lock was 1,000 feet long, and I wanted you to keep that number in mind. Each lock was 1,000 feet long and 110 feet wide, and they were 80 feet deep. I had told you that the elevation needed to be 85 feet, and there were 2 miter gates for each one of the paired locks. There were more obstacles than that, because on the Atlantic side there was the largest river in Panama, and tropical rains often cause that river to elevate 20 feet and develop turbulent and unpredictable flow, which had the potential of destroying the canal. The answer then was the building of a dam to control the flow of the JRainesLectureSplit River, which is the river I just described. So you have the Gatum Dam, G-A-T-U-M dam, which when you transverse the Panama Canal, you immediately see that on the right-hand side. It's the largest earthen dam in the world. It was built to control the flow of the water of the river. It created a lake, which is called Gatum Lake, and interestingly, the lake was very, very helpful, because when the dam was put in, the lake then flooded, and the lake became part of the canal itself. So no digging had to be done during that part of the dam.